Here's a peek at what guests had to say after the show.
We are back on the internet. When you met Pope Francis, Steve, did you ask if he was an atheist? And if so, what was his answer?
I didn't. I was very polite, but they let us screen the movie in the Vatican, and they...
Yeah, he actually saw it, didn't he? That says a lot right there, that he would just watch it.
He didn't see it himself. His private secretary saw it, but he invited, and his private secretary said he would have the Pope. I said, would you have the Pope watch this? He said, yes, I would. And they said, this is entirely in keeping with the approach the Church is taking now. He said, and the Pope's senior advisor said, this is a new regime. I pointed out that certain right-wing Catholics in the US have criticized the movie for being, they say, anti-religious, and he said, that's not who we are.
Right.
He said,
good. Now, he is a different kind of Pope. Right. Okay, Jane Harmon, do you think the intelligence-gathering methods under Obama qualify as an overreach of executive power?
I think there's been an overreach of executive power for years, predating Obama. Certainly starting, if it didn't start before, in the early Bush administration. And the authorization to use military force in Afghanistan, which I voted for, and every member of Congress did except for one, authorized the use of military force against those who attacked us in Afghanistan for a short period of time, and yet that has been the underlying law that's justified all kinds of things. So that's one point. On the surveillance point, I applaud Obama for saying we should scale back the laws. I support scaling back the laws. But we do have laws, let's remember that. And we do have a federal court that oversees the laws, and we do have a Congress that tries hard to provide oversight on a bipartisan basis. So we can do better.
You're against all droning?
No. I'm for cutting it way back and having strict limits on it, but no, I'm not against. It's a tool which we can use, but better yet, we should win the argument with the kid trying to strap on deciding whether to strap on the suicide vest. That's the right way to do it.
Right. And he'll listen to us, I'm sure. Okay, what's a fair ratio, Ralph B. asks, of CEO pay to average employee pay? Should there be a maximum wage? Well, that probably hasn't been... FDR talked about a maximum wage. He was serious about that. Yeah, I would say yes. I mean, I don't know what anyone does with $25 billion. I don't know how you could possibly spend it, even if you tried.
Well, I mean, I don't know how you could pick the right one, but I mean, you can certainly look, it's not an ahistorical question. You can, if you look back at the 50s and 60s and 70s, we had a much lower ratio than we have now, and a much stronger middle class. And those things aren't disconnected.
No,
and so if we believe that American values come from everybody having a ladder up and being able to climb, well, there has to be middle rungs on that ladder. Right. And when CEO pay is so out of whack, we don't have that.
And it's not unprecedented. When John D. At some point, John D. Rockefeller was worth, I think, 2% of American GDP, and they felt that that was a little exorbitant.
Yeah, the problem with this, I think, is whether you think it matters what the gap is here or what is at the bottom. I mean, obviously, poverty is a huge problem, and obviously the way in which the middle class's wages have dropped is a huge problem. I can't get too excited about what the guy at the top is earning. Personally, it doesn't bother me at all. Obviously, you're going to have to take some of the tax revenue, maybe a lot of the tax revenue from that person. But this idea that we should worry a huge amount about what the gap is, I don't understand why.
But within a corporation, if it's the amount of, if a corporation has finite resources for the moment in a snapshot, the amount that it devotes to one person at the top is taken out of what it can pay to the people on its line. And that's a value issue.
And let's talk about the minimum wage.
It's all about, yes.
We ought to raise the minimum wage.
Of course, everyone.
No question about it. It's the moral thing to do, and economically, most people think it will. I know there's this CBO report, but I don't think that was fully understood, and certainly my view. And let's applaud Gap, by the way, for raising the minimum wage for all its employees this week. It will take 1 million people out of poverty, and that's the right thing to do.
This is actually this is a much more difficult issue than that. They did say it would take 1 million people out of poverty, and that it would help a lot more than that. They also said it might fire 500,000 people who are the most vulnerable. I mean, one of the problems here, Thomas Sowell has written a lot about this, is that the people at the bottom here are the people who don't have the skills. And if you raise the minimum wage too high, you can find those people in a lot of trouble. Now, it's not that people like me who don't think there should be a minimum wage are just bastards. It's that there are other ways of dealing with this as well. The New York Times, for example, in 1987 wrote an editorial, and they said we shouldn't have a minimum wage. What we should do instead is things like the Earned Income Tax Credit, so on and so forth. I don't know why we've suddenly hit again on the minimum wage. I think it must be politics.
We've always raised the minimum wage.
In the
No, but why have
UK, when there was an argument about the minimum wage years ago, there were all these people saying if you introduce a minimum wage, it's going to cripple industry, it's going to cripple business, it's going to lead to huge unemployment, and we introduced it, and that didn't happen.
No, I appreciate that.
That line is always put out by people who have vested interest. It just means that it impacts on their shareholders, and they don't get their dividends quite as high as they would have done the year before, and that's a price worth paying.
If it's not just people who have vested interest.
Let's not have British on British violence.
But there is a serious economic argument against this, and there are serious arguments that if you want to help people at the bottom end, then there are much better ways to do it than to raise the minimum wage. This is not some right-wing fantasy.
I'm cynical about that.
But you know what? First of all, the people who are making the minimum wage now, no vacation, if they take no vacation, which of course they don't, they make 15 grand a year. With the raise to $10 an hour, it would be 21 grand a year. I keep asking this of every conservative on the show. Could you live on either one of these numbers?
No.
Could you live on $15,000 a year in America?
Companies like Walmart actually depend on the government to provide subsidies to their workers so that they can continue to reap benefits at the top. I mean, you know, if...
Okay, well then take the subsidies away. I'm fine with not subsidizing Walmart.
In order for people to survive, for a Walmart worker to survive, they actually need to have things like food stamps and other forms of aid in order simply to survive and pay for child care and all the rest. And so effectively, we're subsidizing
yes, but those two things are
Walmart
linked.
executives and having extraordinarily high rates of pay because they don't want to pay
Those two things are linked, though. If you provide subsidies to Walmart, they will pay people less. I mean, every economic action you take does have a consequence. So let's just be real about what we're going to do.
But the thing is, I think the point is, though, that if Walmart was forced to pay a higher wage, because everybody had to pay a minimum wage, there wouldn't be a competitive difference between Walmart and its competitors. And then we would be paying for fewer people to be on food stamps. And so you'd be happy because the welfare subsidies would be going away. And the people who work at Walmart would be happy because they'd be getting paid more. And the Walton family would get less. And that's okay.
The six Walmart heirs. The six Walmart heirs, I think, are worth $90 billion. Come on. How can you justify keeping people living like animals?
But again, we flipped the argument here. We're not debating whether there are people who are poor and whether we should do something, and we're not debating whether there are people who are incredibly rich, and we're not saying there's no gap. We're arguing how best to deal with it. And I'm saying there is a serious economic argument against the minimum. The reason the minimum wage has suddenly come up is because Obama has found himself in a position now where he can't get too much done domestically. Republicans just say no. Now, the people also probably don't want too much more spending. So what can he do? He can mandate that that money comes from private companies. It doesn't have to come out of either debt or taxation. I'm not saying...
It's not new.
You know it's not a new idea. No, it's not new, but nor is the idea that this is harmful.
But what is new is, since 1979, productivity's gone up 90%, but wages only 8%.
Sure.
And we know where all that money went.
But that doesn't change the value of labor inherently.
Well, but we should...
It's an economic argument.
Public policy can make a difference in terms of how much cash companies are sitting on versus what they're paying to workers. We can make a policy decision as a nation that more corporate cash should go into workers' pockets.
That income
is disposable income, and these workers with more income are going to spend it, and that's going to raise the economy for everyone. And oh, by the way, let's fix our education system so workers at every level,
nothing is free.
The lower level,
there are very few
education.
total win-wins.
No. So why is there this sort of latent hostility towards the idea that this might not be the best way of doing it? Why is it suddenly that this is the only way and everyone who opposes it is evil?
Nobody thinks you're evil.
You're not evil.
Oh, look at you.
You're the Wolf of Wall Street. You're not evil. No. All right, thank you very much. We got to go.
Real Time with Bill Maher. Ask Bill and his guests your questions right after the show at HBO.com or on Twitter.